Well, my relationship with comic books happened because many of my students, that was their vocabulary, and they were being subdued in the school system. And I took it upon myself to say, I will create a space where we will make some demands too. It can't be just, anything goes, but some pretty sophisticated stuff. And it was close to my heart because I'm a storyteller in life, and I love sequential art. I love the narrative, and so comic books are natural for me. I have not been a comic book collector, but some of the graphic novels I feel have been some of the more powerful books I've looked at. I love Chris Ware, and in fact, his work where he created the box and had all the elements in there separate, I felt like opened up a whole new window. And my students and I talked about how one of the lovely things about comic books is you can disseminate them to others, and they don't have a copy of the art. The comic book is the art. And so I like this idea that there's not just, let's say, one institution or one collector who gets to own the original. They've usually paid a price for it that the average person can't afford, so they're locked out. And so that anybody else can only afford, let's say, a book that talks about the art, not the art. And so the beauty of comic books, to me, is you are holding the art. And so, or even if it's digital comics, which are really interesting, and the idea that you can go in different dimensions in your sequential story is exciting to me. It's also interesting in this fact that I've already talked about how I'm attracted to the opposites. So here I am, a not comic book artist who has facilitated comic artists to create their comic books. As you well know, at least twice we created comic books for what was then Miami Children's Hospital, and to great results. We got feedback from some of the nurses and other people working directly with the patients from our cancer comic book that these children were just thrilled with the characters. And so it brought in the humor that you're talking about, because even though we thought it was a good idea, and I think the patients thought it was a good idea, that the patients portrayed in the story were their own hero. But of course, that was not their favorite character. Their favorite character was Stooley, the poop character, who sat on a three-legged stool in the bathroom pontificating, because we were told that, who knew, but they take stool samples from these young cancer patients, and they don't even know what you mean when you use that terminology, a stool sample. But now they could laugh about it, and in fact, they wanted to make a female. I guess Stooley was a male by default. I don't know, but they wanted to make a female version of Stooley too. And one of the artists involved in the project ended up visiting by invitation the cancer ward and creating Play-Doh Stooley characters with the young patients. And so that's the kind of beautiful moment that this thing feeds of. Because the other thing that's come out of my experience with, let's say, my students teaching me their language of comic books, is that a part of the language these days is also the action figures and toys that may go along with a comic book. And that suddenly turned into a valid art piece in our world that I was creating in what was called at the time visual thinking classes. They're morphing into a different name as we speak. But so it's that idea that instead of saying my language is the only way to speak of something, that there's this other language. It's valid and it is more universal. It can be disseminated. Like, I can afford a Chris Ware piece, and I'm thrilled with that idea. I'm thrilled with the idea that it's something affordable to me. So that is one of the problems with looking at my work. There is the moment of, let's say, performance where people come to see it. I love to be in the spot. Opening night's nice, but I almost like those other moments. sometimes when you're setting up a show and somebody who might not even go to the show. I was in a show up in the Appleton Museum where some electricians just couldn't help themselves and needed to talk to me about the piece I was putting up. And I found myself thinking, this is one of the most thrilling moments of my life. Like the electricians who are walking by are just doing their job, but for some reason, my piece, which was made up exclusively of used coffee filters and entomological pins, fascinated these guys who were kind of separated from the situation. The other value of comic book art in an academic setting is because a good comic story requires a good story. And it requires research, and it requires editing down decisions, what's visual, what's words, and how will it be laid out on a page. And so anything like that, even if, let's say a young artist isn't going to end up being a comic artist, that type of discipline, which I've actually applied to all my classes, because comic artists talk about, creating drawings very quickly. What can you remember what it looks like? How basic can it be and you still know what it is? And so I do some of these time drills with my students because I'm emphasizing that if the drawing is communication, it's not about spending 3 hours getting the shading perfectly on an apple in a bowl. It's about, you got your idea across. Did they get the idea? Did you make that image in a way that they didn't get it, and so how would you change it so they would get it? Or maybe it's okay that it looks like something different to them. So I'm having fun, which humor is needed in art, although some people would laugh at me saying that. I have what might be considered black humor because, like enormous shark fins are tragic or funny. You understand? Like, especially when I'm making them, they're these big, you probably have to edit this, but they're big phallic shapes that I'm paper macheing and realizing how phallic they look, and I need to put them on the wall to kind of like lower that dialogue and heighten the tragedy of what's happening to the sharks. And so I don't know that I have that much humor in my art, except for art that you don't see. Just 2 weeks ago, I created a piece called Do It Yourself, Gretchen Scharnagl's Art for a Friend. And it was a collection of refrigerator magnets that he had minimal instructions, but then he was allowed to change it on his refrigerator at will. So, so there's that. But that's let's say, the thing I do on the side because I guess comic relief.